Hey guys, it's Joe and Ribs coming at you with another daily Slay the Spire chat. Today I want to talk about Masterful Stab. Look at that beautiful artwork. Masterful Stab is an uncommon for Silent, and I do not blame you if you have never thought about this card before. It can only be played if there are no other cards in your hand, and it deals 15 damage. If that happens to be the case, and you might be wondering, why on earth do I care? How can this card possibly be worth talking about for 10 to 15 minutes? And I wanna start this video off by saying I think this card is pretty good. I don't take it a ton. Where I will take it is early on in runs to try to get some damage into my deck, and when I take it in those circumstances, I tend to form runs somewhat heavily around the fact that I have this card. All of a sudden, a card like Backflip, which draws 2 cards for 1 energy, goes down in value. I become a deck that doesn't want to, draw a ton of cards every turn and then play the best ones it sees. I'm a deck that wants to draw 5 cards every turn and play those 5 cards. And one of the cards is Masterful Stab. And the point is that dealing 15 damage for 0 energy is so strong that that's actually semi-justifiable. It's not... I don't start a run thinking, oh god, I really want to be Masterful Stab. How it works is if I'm on floor 3 or 4 or something and I haven't gotten a strong damage card and I get offered Masterful Stab, I think, oh, if I take Masterful Stab here, it'll be pretty good against the Gremlin Knob or Lagavulin. It'll do really good damage against the Actoboss if it's Guardian or Hexaghost, or maybe if it's Slime. And that justifies me taking it. And supporting the card is worth what it gives me in those situations. It can lead to some really interesting runs, and the first time I ever sort of experienced this type of Masterful Stab was when I was doing a Twitch chat draft, and they were memeing and took 3 of them by floor 15, and then the deck actually won pretty easily at a fairly high ascension, and I was like, oh, yeah, playing 5 cards a turn and one of them costs 0 energy and deals 15 damage is actually pretty good, it turns out, in this game. Which doesn't really surprise me that much when I say it like that, but I think it's something worth saying. So a lot of people, when they see me taking a Masterful Stab, they're thinking Clash. They compare it to Clash, and I've had people say this is a bad Clash. And I think that is so incredibly wrong. And I want to sort of explain... Okay, I don't think Clash is very good. Maybe I should have made a Clash video first, but I didn't, so whatever. But I've talked a lot about Ironclad and how I don't want to have a ton of attack cards in the deck. I want my deck to be, just a few attack cards which deal enough damage to get you through to a point where you have some huge engine which is winning you fights by itself. And Clash is the worst possible attack for that, because it needs all the other cards in your hand to be attacks for it to do anything. And if the cards you're putting in your deck are generally not attacks, if they're fairly expensive powers and shrug-it-offs, you just can't play this card very often. And getting to attack for 14 for 0 energy is worse than getting to attack for 6 for 1 energy with a strike from your starter deck, if it has a condition placed on it and you have 30 strength. Often I'll have 30 strength by turn 5 or something in a fight, and I just want to have an attack I can cast, and Clash is a card that I can often not cast. But the thing about silent decks is their engines don't have to be about drawing a lot of cards. Their engines can be about drawing just cards which do things very consistently. I think Cloak and Dagger is sort of the quintessential example. Cloak and Dagger blocks and attacks together. It synergizes with all the strong relics. I have an entire video talking about Cloak and Dagger. But, like, yeah, I want like 3 or 4 of these in my deck. And they block and they attack at the same time. Silent has a much harder time scaling up in ridiculous ways to Ironclad, and so its damage tends to be output over the course of a fight semi-linearly. You might have a big Phantasmal Killer turn with Pen Nip or something. You might have some scaling going on with Shuriken, but often you just have fairly linear damage. Noxious Fumes is a little bit backloaded, sure, whatever. And linear damage can get you there sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. And so in this deck, which has cards like this, it just doesn't actually matter that much that I'm drawing a ton of cards every turn and like picking the ones that I want, because I just sort of have the right cards every turn. Whatever. I might have a well-laid plans, so that, you know, out of the 5 cards I draw each turn, I can add a 6th card which does the thing that I know I want to do that turn. So that could help. But in general, it's often fine for Silent just to not actually draw that many cards and just have fairly linear output throughout a fight, and you might have a big X like Malaise or something like that, which breaks the fight open, and then you win. And Masterful Stab is just fine in a deck like this. It is excellent. Now, I'm not saying that you have to play Silent like that. Reiterating, I'm not saying you have to play Silent like that, or that that's like what I want my Silent deck to look like always. Obviously, you can have Silent decks which like play gargantuan doppelganger turns and just kill stuff for 300 damage, or Silent decks which like have Ice Cream and burst Malaise and something has minus 28 strength and stuff like that, and it's really cool, and you know, you can have card draw in there to support it and stuff and whatever. And what I'm describing to you is a very boring sort of approach to playing a Silent, where like, no, I'm just going to have a couple of footworks and an after image in my deck. I'm going to make 30 block a turn, deal, you know, 25 damage. And I mean, that beats Donu Deka and Time Eater and possibly beats the Awakened one. Those are the end bosses of the game. And it beats them at Ascension to 15. Like, this is just a pretty strong thing to do. And Masterful Stab fits into that really nicely. It ups your damage output in that deck even in late game, and it's just really strong early game to be able to deal 15 damage for 0 energy. Now, if you do the math, you'll recognize that you draw 5 cards every turn. And if you have 3 energy at the start of the game, then, like, you know, 1 card's done, 2 cards are done, 3 cards are done. You have Masterful Stab and something else in your hand. And you might be thinking, okay, how on earth do I play Masterful Stab ever? So, at the very start of the game, you have Survivor and Neutralize. Neutralize is a 0-cost card which gets out of your hand, and Survivor discards another card from your hand. And so anytime you draw a Masterful Stab with Neutralize or Survivor after turn 1, you'll be able to play it. If you draw it turn 1, you don't get to play it, but you usually don't play all of the cards in your turn 1 hand anyway. So it's not that huge of a setback. There are a lot of other very strong low-cost cards for Silent. I do not recommend Deflect early on because it's bad against Gremlin Knob, it's bad against the Chosen, it's bad against Snecko. But Slice deals enough damage to be very reasonable to add to your deck. I've taken Prepared, by the way, like unupgraded for like supporting Masterful Stabs. I did that today. There are so many cards which cost 0, which like I'd have to talk about for several minutes to explain when and where not to take them. I guess we'll get into that later. What was the other one I really wanted to talk about? Endless Agony. Endless Agony is incredible. I mean, it deals 8 damage for 0 energy. It's like a Slice that's really good. There are... the other really big one is Flying Knee. Flying Knee gets you extra energy on the next turn, so you can play a 4th card and get Masterful Stab set up. So there are lots of ways to quite reliably play Masterful Stab on turn 2, 3, 4, etc. There are just like a couple of cards that you can add to your deck, which are already pretty good in the beginning of the game, somewhere between pretty good and very good, in fact, which help you play Masterful Stab as well. And Masterful Stab is great against Lagavulin, great against Gremlin Knob. The fact that it isn't particularly good against Tri-Sentinel fight is mitigated heavily by the fact that it's the easiest of the Act 1 Elite fights. If you're struggling with that fight, you have to burst down one of the guys on the outside edges of the fight, and from there you just get attacked for 9 each turn until they're dead, and most reasonable decks can handle that without taking much damage. So there are quite a few cards that you can pick up to support Masterful Stab early on in the game. And the payoff is you have a card which attacks for 15 for 0 energy, which is really good. It's very good. I also want to point out that Silent does have a decent amount of discard available. So like Survivor discards, you can put a Prepared or a Prepared Plus in your deck at some point. Tools of the Trade is an excellent option for discard, a rare power, which is very, very strong. There are just a decent number of ways to do this. Well-laid plans also sort of helps in a slightly different way in that if you can't play Masterful Stab one turn, you can hold it for the next turn. But there are lots of ways to help with like situations where you draw a Masterful Stab with a wound that an enemy put in your deck or something like that. And that really matters. It's, I would say, considerably easier for Silent to play Masterful Stab than it is for Ironclad to play Clash in the sorts of decks that I build for Ironclad and Silent. If you're building an Ironclad deck that's only attacks, then sure, you can play Clash all the time, and that's cool, but I have not had success doing that at Ascension 15. I don't think it's very good compared to the other options, and yeah, that's the issue there. But for Silent, I think there are lots of cards to support playing Masterful Stab, even in fights where you're getting wounds or burns put into your deck, and it just deals really nice damage, and sometimes Silent has trouble picking up damage, and Masterful Stab's a nice option to have available to you. I have one other small point, and that's that at the start of runs, assuming that you made it to the Act 1 boss in the previous run, you get an option on the first floor from the whale. You get a choice of 4, and the 4th one always gives up your starting relic for a random boss relic. And that's actually a decent pick on Silent, in my opinion. I take it some of the time in Ascension 15. If none of the other 3 look particularly valuable, I will heavily consider, if not straight up pull the trigger on randomizing my boss relic. It's a very high variance option, but the fact that Masterful Stab exists is one of the reasons why I think it's quite good on Silent. Because this card is powerful for all of the reasons I've just said, and it runs into this problem where on turn 1, you don't get the power because you draw 7 cards. Your starting relic as Silent makes you draw 7 cards on turn 1, and then 5 cards every turn after that. So if you get rid of those extra 2 cards on turn 1, you can start playing Masterful Stab straight from turn 1. And that's actually sometimes pretty powerful. Also, the boss relics that you can random into, quite a lot of them are giving you extra energy, which makes it very easy to cast Masterful Stab every time you get it. So if you do random a boss relic and get a 4th energy for Act 1 as Silent, I would highly recommend picking up a Masterful Stab if you see it. It's very strong in that situation. Yeah, that's basically what I had to say. I think Masterful Stab flies under the radar. I think a lot of people just don't even think this card is interesting to think about, or maybe have never even tried thinking about it. I think it's a really fascinating card, and I have had decks which have succeeded at Ascension 15 with it as a large source of their damage. I've had it carry my decks through early acts in Ascension 15. I have had decks where I've put it in the deck early, had it win like Act 1.5 for me, and then given it away at a Fairy Fire for a full heal, and it's not on the deck anymore. There's an event where you offer a card to pixies or fairies or something, and if it's an uncommon, they'll give you a full heal. And have my Masterful Stab. I want to start putting backflips in the deck and ending turn with cards in hand, you know? It already dealt 250 damage or something for 0 energy. That's fine. You can have it now. It's going to retire. So I think the card's quite strong in the right circumstances. I'm not saying go force yourself to play Masterful Stab. I'm just saying be on the lookout for those runs where Masterful Stab does make sense, and don't be afraid to pull the trigger on it, because it is very strong, and I think it's fairly straightforward to work out, you know, how to build your deck so that Masterful Stab can be a good source of damage in it. Alright. I've been Joe and Ribs. Thanks for tuning in. Sorry if I sound like a complete crazy person. I feel like saying Masterful Stab is good is maybe the most ludicrous thing that I've done so far in these videos, but legitimately I think that it can be played in a deck that wins, and it can be the right thing to pick as you play through the game, so I just wanted to say that. Let me know what you think in comments. Drop me a like and I don't know, send me a picture of your cat or whatever you do on the internet. I have links to Discord and my Twitch channel and stuff below the video, and I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you tomorrow for another daily Play the Spire chat. Bye, everybody!